The Environmental Protection Agency has said that 38 operators are engaged in large-scale unauthorised peat harvesting in flagrant violation of environmental law and must stop. It says local authorities in 7 counties must take appropriate enforcement action against illegal peat extraction businesses within their jurisdiction.
There's plenty of activity on this bog near Milltown Pass in County Westmeath, where milled peat has been harvested for many years. The EPA says large-scale illegal commercial extraction of peat is widespread in Ireland, and the sector does not operate within planning or environmental laws.
They would have originally taken away all of the natural environment, drained away the water, and then they would have started to mill the surface of the peat, as you can see here. They have to harrow that, allow it to dry, and then it's gathered up and brought off for processing.
About 300,000 tonnes of peat, worth about €40 million, is being illegally harvested from these sites annually, nearly all of which is being exported. The EPA has investigated 38 sites across 7 counties where this is taking place without any of the necessary authorisations. And it says local authorities have been conspicuous in their lack of enforcement of environmental law, and their performance in this area is patently inadequate.
We've shared all of our enforcement information, the location of these operations, the size and nature of these operations, aerial photography. All of that information has been shared with the local authorities. And it's our expectation that they will develop county-wide enforcement plans and site-specific enforcement plans and implement those plans and hold these operators to account.
There's no question that bog stripping like this can be devastating for nature. It takes away habitats, it can pollute rivers, it destroys natural carbon sinks, areas that absorb the greenhouse gases that are driving devastating climate change. And by lowering the water table, it can have a very devastating effect on natural heritage areas such as this one here right across the road. George Lee, RTE News at the Pass of Kilbride in County Westmeath.
Now, staying with that story, shortly before we came on air, I spoke to Michael Fitzmaurice, Independent Ireland TD for Roscommon Galway, who's a member of the Oireachtas Agriculture Committee. I first asked him if he accepted the EPA's claim that large-scale illegal commercial extraction of peat is widespread in Ireland.
I would question a lot of what have come out for the simple reason the headline was large-scale peat extraction. Large-scale is defined by this EPA as over 50 hectares. Now, my understanding is, and obviously we look after turf cutters, so that's a totally different process than milling peat. I was on the previous Agricultural Committee, and we dealt with this in detail, David. And my understanding is now that the people involved in it at the moment are under 30 hectares. There is applications in at the moment to one of the councils, which has been sent on to An Bord Pleanála. Obviously, my understanding is that you can do a screening out. If a screening out is successful, you can go for a Section 5. If it's not successful...
Sorry to cut across you, Deputy, but we don't want to confuse people too much with all this, because it is a little bit complicated and involved.
Yeah, so well, people need to know that there's a Section 5 that you can get an exemption, or if it doesn't screen out, you have to go for planning permission.
Okay.
And at the moment, my understanding is that the science has been done on 15 other applications and they are ready for putting in.
Okay, so when you say screening out, this is an appropriate application, I think it's called. So that's basically where it's checked to see if there's going to be any impact on the environment.
Correct.
Is that it? Okay.
Correct.
Now, the EPA would say that by its nature, operations of this sort, and we're not talking about turf cutting as you would be involved in for fuel, we're talking about large-scale extraction of peat for horticultural purposes mainly. They would say operations like that inherently, of their nature, are going to have an environmental impact, and a serious one.
Well, first of all, David, they're not judge and jury. It's the planning authority, be it the An Bord Pleanála or be it the councils, that's the planning authority. They shouldn't preempt something. That's the first thing that needs to be made very clear. You use the word large scale again. Under 30 hectares isn't large scale. But when you do that, give the opportunity for, be it the councils, to give a Section 5 or whatever. On top of that, David, you must realise, in 2015, there was 3 million tonnes of peat being produced in this country, mainly by Burnamona. Obviously, they have got out of it at the moment, and now it's down to 340 or 50,000 tonnes. That's 90% of a reduction in the last 10 years. On top of that, we also need, and people need to realise that, for the horticulture, for the professional horticulture sector and for the mushroom sector, for growing flowers and certain vegetables, this is required at the moment. Bear in mind
most
that
of this has been exported.
Sorry, David. Bear in mind that we're also importing 300,000 tonnes, and bear in mind also that Burnamona, when they ceased production, had huge pockets of peat left, which they sold to the private sector, and some of that would be moving over the last few years, which would give the tonnage higher, in my opinion, than what the actual figure should be. But be clear for everybody. Everybody needs to be clear on what's exported. When it's being exported, David, the main ingredient, and there in a lot of the export materials, there's 4 to 5 different ingredients. If the main ingredient had 30% and 3 more of them had 20%, it is put down as peat. So we need to have accurate figures of knowing what is exported in actual peat, not what is in the bag overall.
Sure, but I think the argument the EPA are making, and you mentioned Burnamona are now restoring the peatland that they operated on. They seem to be doing a very good job of that. The worry would be some of these operations, commercial operations, if they're not governed by planning permissions, if they're not governed by environmental impact assessments, they won't do that. They won't restore the land afterwards. Where's the guarantee that they will?
Well, first of all, David, actually ordinary turf cutters around this country has restored 6,000 hectares, and Burnamona are at theirs at the moment. They are restoring, I think, something like 30 to 40,000 hectares, so has Quilcha, and so has private individuals as well. And I do think, in fairness, in talking to the people involved in that those enterprises this morning, they are fully want to be compliant with everything. What has happened over the last number of years is that certain ministers wouldn't come into our Ag Committee when we were trying to resolve it. The goalposts were changed by environmental law, and I think those people want to be compliant, but bear in mind that when you go to make an application, it takes probably the guts of a year to screen it out or do an EIA, an appropriate assessment and all of that. The number of people that's at that in Ireland is very, very scarce, and it takes time. So I believe that those people will come in with their applications and try and make sure that they regulate themselves properly.
OK, Michael Fitzmaurice, Independent Ireland TD for Roscommon Galway. Thank you so much for joining us on 6
Thank you, David.